Alright, how you guys doing today? Today we're going to take a look at rationalizing the denominator. Now, rationalizing the denominator is a skill that's used in a lot of different math courses. In your first introduction to it's usually in Algebra 1, and then later you'll see it in Algebra 2 and probably a pre-calculus class and definitely calculus. So those will be the courses that you will see this type of skill used in. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the pieces that are going to be really common. You'll see these all the time. If you can memorize these facts, these will really help you when it comes to simplifying square roots, and no matter which course you're in. These are some of the more common ones that you'll tend to see. And just kind of looking through the list there, when you have square root of 8, that's just going to break down to 2 roots of 2. Square root of 12 is going to be 2 roots of 3, and so on. So kind of like memorizing your times tables, if you have these square roots memorized, these radicals memorized, it'll really help things go a lot easier for you down the road. When we do this technique called rationalizing the denominator, now remember, the denominator is going to be the bottom part of a fraction. So that bottom part of the fraction is going to be in one of these three forms. Either square root of b, a plus the square root of b, or a minus the square root of b, where a and b represent any integers. If your denominator is square root of b, all you're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by is negative the square root of b, and that's it. If you have a plus the square root of b, you're going to multiply that by its conjugate, which is a minus the square root of b. And then similarly, if you have a minus the square root of b, its conjugate is going to be a plus the square root of b. So that's all you're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by. So you have to recognize what form the denominator is in first, and then multiply it by its appropriate conjugate. Now when you take a look at these, we're going to do several examples of each one. Here are the first 4 examples that we'll go through together for when the denominator is square root of b. Now one of the things you have to recognize is one of the properties of square roots is that you can separate this into the square root of the numerator and the square root of the denominator. So when you have square root of 11 over 36, you can change that into each one of those separate radicals. The other piece that you have to recognize is that square root of 36, that's a perfect square. So when you simplify that, you'll just get square root of 11, and then the square root of 36, that's just 6. So we didn't even have to do anything on that one other than separate that numerator and the denominator and then simplify from there. Now for example 2, we're going to have square root of 5 over 2. So what you're going to do is you're going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator. Well, first we're going to separate them. Square root of 5 over square root of 2. And then we're going to multiply the top and the bottom, the numerator and denominator, by square root of 2 over square root of 2. Now square root of 5 times square root of 2, that's just going to give us square root of 10. And then square root of 2 times square root of 2, well, the radical goes away and you're just left with 2. And that's because square root of 2 times square root of 2 is really square root of 4, but square root of 4 is just 2. So that's what happens when you have it in that form. Now this, I think you're going to start to see a pattern here. So if you have 5 over square root of 3, all right, no big deal. Multiply the numerator and denominator by square root of 3 over square root of 3. Now 5 times square root of 3 just gives you 5 roots of 3. And then square root of 3 times square root of 3, that's done. Now there's 2 ways to do number 4, but what I'm going to do first is recognize that the square root of 12 can be simplified. So when I do that, and this again, it kind of helps if you have these memorized a little bit, because square root of 12, you can break that down into square root of 4 and square root of 3, because square root of 4 is a perfect, or 4 is a perfect square. So that's going to simplify down to 2 square roots of 3. Now when you have a fraction like this, you don't want to multiply the top and the bottom by 2 square roots of 3. You just want to look at the radical, and that's square root of 3. So you're going to multiply the top and the bottom by just square root of 3 over square root of 3. Now when you do that, in the numerator, 7 times square roots of 3, you'll just get 7 square roots of 3. But in the denominator, you'll get 2 times, and then basically the number that's underneath the radical. 2 times 3 is what you'll end up with on the bottom. Now we just got to simplify one more step, so we'll have 7 roots of 3 over 6. So that's how you simplify fractions when your denominator is a square root. Now I'm going to give you 4 that I want you to try on your own, just to make sure you have this down. So these 4 problems, that we're going to take a look at. I want you to try each one of these, pause the video, and come back and see if you got them correct. They'll be totally worked out, so if there's any questions you have, you'll be able to see the work along the way. But go ahead and hit pause, then come back and check your answers. So how did you do with those four? Hopefully you got all four of them correct. If not, go back and see where your mistake was. Taking a look at probably your algebra. That's usually where most people will make the mistake. They'll just make a mistake when they multiply. So double check that, make sure you're good, and then let's move on to the next type of denominator that you'll need to be rationalizing. That is going to be when the denominator is a plus the square root of b. So our first example here, we have 3 over 7 plus the square root of 2. So the conjugate of 7 plus the square root of 2 is 7 minus the square root of 2. So we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by 7 minus the square root of 2 over 7 minus the square root of 2. Now when you do that, you're just going to have to be really careful to make sure that you apply the distributive property correctly. And I'm going to write this out the long way. So I'm going to have 3 times 7 minus the square root of 2, all that over 7 plus the square root of 2 times 7 minus the square root of 2. Simplifying from here is going to be pretty straightforward. All right, in the numerator, we're going to have 21 minus 3 square roots of 2. Now in the denominator, what I want you guys to kind of think about a little bit is back in when you took a look probably at when you were first being introduced to a technique called FOIL, you would have something like x plus 3 times x minus 3. And when you would do that, you would end up with x squared minus 9 because the middle terms would drop out. All right, so you would just end up with this as an expression. Same kind of idea here. When you have 7 plus square root of 2 times 7 minus the square root of 2, what you're going to do is go ahead and multiply the 7 and the 7 together. That's going to give you 49. And then when you multiply the square root of 2 times negative square root of 2, you're just going to get negative 2. So a couple more steps here to simplify. 21 minus 3 roots of 2 will be in your numerator. But your denominator, 49 minus 2, that's just going to give you 47. So that's what you're going to end up with when you're all done with that part. Now, kind of a shortcut on this when you take a look at these, 7 times 7 is 49, and then just subtract the other number that's underneath the radical. So let's kind of take a look at this second example, see if you can kind of pick up this pattern. Here, common mistake that people will make, they'll want to change the negative 2 here to a positive 2. Don't do that. All right, so be really careful because that's a common mistake people will make. But then what you're going to do is multiply numerator and denominator by the conjugate of negative 2 plus the square root of 7, which is just going to be negative 2 minus the square root of 7. So that'll go in the numerator and the denominator. Now again, when you multiply that across, just be really careful, take your time. So negative 5 times, and then negative 2 minus the square root of 7, all over negative 2 plus square root of 7, and then negative 2 minus the square root of 7. Now let's go ahead and do this part here. We've got negative 5 times negative 2. Oops, forgot the negative sign right there. So negative 5 times negative 2 is 10, and then negative 5 times negative square roots of 7 gives me plus 5 square roots of 7 in the numerator. Now in the denominator, multiply the first two terms. Negative 2 times negative 2, that gives me 4. And then root 7 times negative root 7 just gives me 7, and I'm going to be subtracting those. Now when I simplify, 10 plus 5 root 7 in the numerator, and then in the denominator, we'll just have negative 3. Can't simplify anything else, so we're done with that. Again, that kind of shortcut there when you are multiplying the denominators together. Negative 2 plus root 7 times negative 2 minus root 7. Square the first term, negative 2 times negative 2. That gives me the 4. And then square the second term in each binomial. Square root of 7 times negative square root 7. And just subtract that. So 4 minus 7 is how we end up coming up with negative 3. Now 2 quick ones for you to practice here. So go ahead and try each one of these. And pause the video, then come back, check, see how you did on this. Alright, welcome back. How'd you do with these two? Hopefully, for the first one, you ended up with 8 minus 2 square roots of 11, all that over 5. And for number 2, you ended up with negative 9 plus square root of 7, all of that over 74. Just make sure you did your arithmetic correctly and you took your time And you got these two problems correct. There they are, both worked out, so if you have any questions, you can refer to the arithmetic that is there on your screen for you. Now, what we're going to take a look at next is almost the same thing, except this time our denominator is going to be a minus the square root of b. So for these ones, what you're going to want to do, same thing as before, you're going to want to multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. Now the conjugate of 8 minus root 3 is just 8 plus square root of 3. So multiply numerator and denominator by 8 plus the square root of 3. Now 4 times 8, that gives me 32. And then 4 times root 3 gives me 4 roots of 3. Looking at the denominator, 8 times 8, that's 64. And then root 3 times, or negative root 3 times root 3, that gives me minus 3. Cleaning that up, we get 32 plus 4 roots of 3, all that over 61. Can't be simplified anymore, so that's it. That's all the idea is behind that. Go ahead and try the second example on your own, and then unpause the video, come back and see how right you got it, because you're going to be a rock star by the time you're done with this. So check that one, see how you're doing. So right now, go ahead and hit pause and come on back. So how'd you do with those two, or with that example? Hopefully that one, you ended up making sure that when you got to the 2 plus 2 root 3, all of that over negative 2, that you were able to remember to separate that and simplify that until you end up with negative 1 minus square root of 3. Now there's one other type that you're going to see, and that particular type is going to be a little bit different here. That type is going to look like this. Now when you have one like this where you've got square roots in both the numerator and the denominator, just kind of ignore the numerator. You're still going to just multiply it by the conjugate of the denominator. So in this particular one, our conjugate of 2 minus root 10 is 2 plus square roots of 10. So you're going to multiply the top and the bottom by 2 plus square root of 10. Now with this, you're going to have a little bit more work to do. So you're going to have to take your time and make sure that you do everything correctly on here. Now the bottom in the denominator, by now I think you guys will have that. We'll have 4 minus 10 in the denominator. Alright, so that's going to be the easy part. The challenging piece is going to be when you have 3 plus square root of 7 times 2 plus square roots of 10. Now a lot of times people say you can just FOIL that out, or you can go ahead and use the distributive property twice. Either way, what you want to do is go ahead and take your time and make sure that you determine the value of the numerator correctly. So let's go through that piece here. You're going to have 3 times 2, that's going to give you 6. And then 3 times root 10, that's going to give you 3 square roots of 10. Now for my second term, square root of 7 times 2, you just get 2 roots of 7. And then square root of 7 times square root of 10 gives you square root of 70. Ooh, that's big. All of that over 4 minus 10, that's the easy part. You get negative 6. So now let's clean this up here a little bit. The two middle terms, 3 root of 2 and 2 root of 7, those are unlike radicals. So you can't combine those and end up coming up with something else. So just be really, really careful on that. Now the square root of 70, what I want to do is take a look and see if there's anything in there that I can simplify square root of 70 down, if it has any perfect square factors. And in this particular case, it doesn't. So that numerator is as simplified as it could be. Now sometimes some textbooks will have you go through this, and I don't know why they do this, but they'll just want to make it look in this form. So you could leave your answer just the way it is right this. I'm going to go down here below and just kind of write this one. They might separate, since you only have one integer in the denominator, they might separate each piece. And just say, okay, 6 over negative 6 minus 3 roots of 2 over 6. Or they might say, you know, plus and then negative root 6 again, plus 2 square roots of 7, all that over negative 6, plus square root of 70 over negative 6. Then they'll simplify each one of those. So then when you get to this part, 6 divided by negative 6, well, that's just negative 1. And then when you simplify 3 root 2 over negative 6, you get negative root 2 over 2. Then the next piece, 2 root 7 over negative 6 gives you negative root 7 over 3. And then lastly, you get negative square root 70, all that over 6. So that could be another form that your textbook might write it in. Either one, is the same thing. Now there's one more example I want you guys to try, so just hang in there. I want you to double check, make sure that you've got this down and you're really solid with it. So here's your very last thing to try. Just go ahead and do this one. 1 plus root 6 over 7 minus square root of 2. Figure out what that would be when you rationalize the denominator and simplify everything as far as you can. So hit pause, come back, check, and see how much of a rock star you really are, because you've got this one correct, I'm sure. All right, how'd you do? Hopefully you multiplied correctly by the conjugate of 7 plus root 2 over 7 plus root 2. That I'm sure you did fine with. Now again, be careful when you distribute in the numerator and clean everything up to make sure that you end up with your final answer of 7 plus root 2 plus 7 roots of 6 plus 2 roots of 3, all that over 47. Now here's what I want you to double check. Make sure that square root of 12, make sure you simplified that, because that should end up simplifying to 2 square roots of 3. So that's it for this piece. Hopefully you guys are all solid with this. I know you'll need probably a little bit more practice. This skill takes a while to get down, and again, a lot of it is just arithmetic, and it takes a while to make sure that patterns that are in there, that you get those arithmetic pieces down. Just don't be careless, take your time, and you'll be all right. All right, now that's it for today, for this lesson here on rationalizing the denominator. So you guys are going to be rock stars out there now that you know all these number skills. All right, and definitely take a look at those tricks that I showed you to help you simplify that denominator when you're working with rationalizing the denominator. All right, have a great day. Peace.